Shalom, this is Rabbi Paltiel, Chabad of Port Washington, on behalf of JLI, sharing some thoughts about the spiritual journey between Passover and Shavuos, which is coming up very shortly. As we know, every holiday in our faith is not just supposed to be a remembrance of some anniversary that took place 3,500 years ago, but even more importantly, it has a direct message to us in the here and now, in terms of our personal growth, our spiritual growth. Everything in Judaism has personal, psychological, and spiritual meaning, which is why we observe many of the mitzvot in the Torah, which we can't physically observe. We still study about them. For example, the laws of various sacrifices, etc. We haven't, God forbid, taken them out of the book, even though we can't observe them, because their mystical meaning is as applicable as ever. These are timeless things until the time very soon when Mashiach comes, and many of these things will be brought back. Similarly, the spiritual journey of the holidays is timeless. The holidays we actually get to observe, but some of the things I'm going to talk about we don't get to observe physically, like the Omer offering and the breads that were brought on Shavuot. We don't bring them now because we don't have the temple, but their message is relevant. What is happening internally with each of us with our psychological and spiritual journey between Passover to Shavuos? So I preface with a cute story that this Jewish community was presented with a terrible decree. Some local anti-Semite landowner came down on the community and threatened them and gave them 30 days to leave town if they don't all convert or whatever. Details unimportant, but terrible decree, and he gathers all the Jews in town square, and he is spewing hatred, anti-Semitism, venom, anger, viciousness, and promising them all kind of terrible things that are going to befall the community if they don't do this, that, or the other. People are worried, people are crying, people are sad and depressed, except for one old Yiddle who was standing right in front of him, right in front of the podium, and he's laughing. And as the anti-Semite gets more worked up with his venom, this laughter becomes increased until it reaches a fevery pitch where this guy is spewing hatred and this old Jew cannot contain himself and he's laughing out of control. And finally the anti-Semite turns to him and says, "Hey Jew, what's so funny? Why are you laughing? Most of your brethren don't seem to find this very funny at all." And he says, "I'll tell you why I'm laughing." He says, "Let me tell you a history lesson. Way back when there was an anti-Semite named Pharaoh. You're not the first anti-Semite. We had plenty of them. And this Pharaoh enslaved us for a long time, but guess what? He's gone, we're still here. And to remember him, we have a holiday called Pesach, when we eat matzah. Then there was another anti-Semite, his name was Haman, also equally terrible and evil. But guess what? He's gone and we're still here. And we have a holiday to commemorate him named Purim, when we eat Hamantash. And then we had another bad guy, Antiochus, who also tried to destroy us and our liberties. But guess what? He's gone and we're here, and we celebrate a holiday called Hanukkah, on which we commemorate his demise by eating a latkes." He says, "I'm looking at you, and I'm trying to think, which food are we going to eat to commemorate your downfall?" It's a good story in general because at the end of the day, to remind us that God promised us we're here forever, we're his eternal people. And not to lose heart when there's challenges facing our people, or current challenges facing all people, to know that Hashem is with us. And I guess figure out what we're going to eat to celebrate getting past Corona. Maybe we'll all break out a Corona beer or something. But I'm telling that story just to segue into something else, because it points to the fact that Judaism and food go together. Right? How does the saying go? They lost, we won, let's eat. There's always food. For a religion that's supposed to be spiritual, we're overly obsessed with our food, but that's part of Judaism. On Shabbos, it's got to be the challah and the gefilte fish and the meat, and you got to have the cholent and the Shavuos, and you got the blitzes. We're busy with food, and it's for good reason. It's good reason, not the topic of today's discussion, but Judaism is very much about bringing heaven to earth rather than taking earth to heaven. It's about finding God in the mundane and celebrating and elevating the sparks. That's what we call tikkun olam, elevating the divine sparks in physical mundane activities. And that's why we celebrate God's salvations through physical acts, including food, which is extremely physical, albeit doing them in a holy fashion, making a bracha, making sure they're kosher, and dedicating our best foods for Shabbat and holidays. But that is definitely part of Judaism. I bring this as introduction to my subject today. If most of the holidays revolve around food, this period of time, we're going to discuss Pesach and the Omer period, 49 days, and Shavuos. Food is front and center. And it gets interesting how it shifts, because on Passover, no leaven shall be had. Not only shall not be eaten, but shall not be found. The language of the Torah, leaven and bread you shall not see, you shall not find anywhere in your premises. Terrible. Leaven bread is out. It's like pork. It's like chazer. People scrub the walls. If you ask me, they get a little ridiculous, but people scrub the walls. It's totally treif, not even one drop of bread. And then during the counting of the Omer, which is the 49 days, 7 weeks between Passover and Shavuos, it nominally is done because the Jews anticipated and they counted down the days from Exodus to receiving the Torah at Sinai. We do that every year. We anticipate Shavuos, when God will once again give us the Torah, not just, as I said before, not just an anniversary of the original giving of the Torah, but God will once again give each of us a Torah, and each of us is invited and empowered to decide to receive that Torah. So the 7 weeks are anticipation, but also they're called the 7 weeks of the Omer, which commemorates an Omer flour offering, which was brought on the second day of Passover. But that had to be from the new crop of the flour, but not wheat, barley. Understand, all flour offerings, what are called food offerings, and mincha offerings, in the temple are primarily wheat, because that's what people eat. The Omer is one of the only exceptions when we substitute the wheat offering for barley. Now, barley is mostly animal food. Why would you bring barley into the temple? We're supposed to bring human offerings. So that's another interesting twist. And then when we come to Shavuos, here it goes to the other extreme. We go back to the wheat offering in the temple, but we bring what's called shtei halechem, 2 breads. And the Torah says, make them leavened. Not only is the leaven not proscribed like on Passover, that you're not allowed to even have even 1 drop of it, here we have leavened bread in the temple. Dear friends, the temple was such a holy place that there was never leavened bread brought in the temple on the offerings. They would always have the matzah, because the temple is like a perpetual Passover. It's a holy place. There's no room for leaven, which represents arrogance and ego, the rising up of the dough. It was always matzah. All the breads that you read about in the temple, which were brought along with the sacrifices, were unleavened. And the exception to that is Shavuos, where they bring shtei halechem, 2 breads, and the text says, chametz te'afena, bake them leavened. So how do we reconcile this flow of the food? Again, Judaism is very telling through the food. Pesach, unleavened, is strictly adhered to. The days of the Omer, we shift to animal food of barley. And then finally on Shavuos, we bring bread, albeit wheat, human food again, but leaven. What's the message? So friends, on a personal psychological level, we read the writings of the Rebbe and the writings of his predecessors, the teachers, the leaders of Chabad Hasidism. We find a whole different story of the flow of the spiritual journey between Passover to Shavuos. And this is based on a verse in Song of Songs. As we know, Song of Songs is, so to speak, a love story between God and his people. Speaks of God taking us out of Egypt and making us his own. And there's a beautiful verse in Song of Songs where we say to God, I'm going to say it first in the Hebrew and translate, Moshcheni. We say to God, pull me. Acharecha narutza. We will then run after you. Moshcheni acharecha narutza. We say, God, please pull me, and then we shall run after you. What's telling is that the verse shifts from singular to plural. Pull me, and then we shall run after you. The Hasidic rabbis have interpreted this to mean we have two souls. Each of us has a divine soul, sometimes referred to as nefesh elokit, the godly soul, or the human soul within us, the godly part of us, and then we have an animal soul. The godly soul is the part of us that's selfless. The human animal soul is the part of us that's selfish. The godly soul is the part of us that's worried, short-sighted, needy. The human soul is calm and visionary and satisfied. But we have both. We're a mixed bag. That's the way God created us. And the goal is, though, not to smother the animal soul and ignore it, but rather to win it over to the divine soul so that our entire person serves Hashem in perfect harmony. And that's really what Exodus is about. We're supposed to free ourselves. Exodus, emancipation, personal redemption is when both parts of me, my divine and my animal, my human angel and my human animal, are working in tandem. They're at peace. I'm not pulled in both directions. I don't have an inner conflict. That's what the goal is of Judaism according to Hasidism, and we try to accomplish it through Torah study, through prayer, through mitzvot, to try to create that inner conflict, that inner peace, so that it's not that one wins over the other, but they work it out. The godly soul leads the animal soul. The human being is still enjoying what the animal soul needs and wants. A healthy balance, though, is created in tandem with the godly soul. So that the ideal of Judaism is not celibacy and fasting and vows of poverty, which would mean smother the animal. It's certainly not the other way around, just follow whatever your animalistic desires are. Eat and drink and be merry, for tomorrow shall we die. That's certainly not the Jewish view. But rather, enjoy a normal, balanced approach of healthy, kosher intimacy, food that we've been talking about, and reaching your own successes and your own potential. These are all Jewish values, but do all of these under the guidance of your divine soul, of your inner angel. Another way of putting it, follow the heart with the guidance of the mind. So your ambitions, your need for companionship, your need for success, your need for human pleasure is all wonderful, so long as it's guided by what's right and wrong in the process. And that's what's called redemption for a human being. And that's what the verse is saying in Song of Songs. We say to God, pull me, in singular, meaning the godly soul. God inspires the godly soul first because it's much easier to inspire the godly soul. It's idealistic and mature. It's the adult in us. Pull me, we say to God. Inspire my godly soul. And I promise you, we will run after you. Translation, we will then convert also the animal soul. And together, in plural, the godly and the animal will follow God. We say, God, please inspire me. Please help me. Please turn me on. Give me that lift that I need. Touch me with your magical finger, the godly soul within me. And I won't just rest on my laurels, but I will then use the wisdom and focus of the godly soul to bring my humanity along for the ride and turn my animal into a mensch. We shall run after you, in plural. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Rebbe writes in one of his talks that this verse in Song of Songs is what happens between Passover to Shavuos. On Passover, God took us out of Egypt, but he only impacted our divine soul. Our animal soul, our egos, etc., had slave mentality. We were stooped in all of the idolatry and negativity of Egypt. On Passover each year, similarly, God touches our divine soul and he says, come with me. We're not transformed internally. Our animalistic selves are still a mess, but we commit to follow God into the wilderness. We make the exit. It's like the addict who says, I'm just going to say no. I'm not transformed. I'm still addicted. I'm still a mess, but I'm allowing a part of me to say, I'm in charge. Just say no. I'm allowing my higher power to free me from my Egypt. Just say no. I'm hardly really free, but I've taken that step. And that's why, but however, the journey of the 7 weeks of the Omer is when we transform the animal self as well. That's why there's 7 weeks. Each week, we work on one of our 7 emotions that the Kabbalah speaks of. Week 1, we work on our kindness and our love, that it should be love and not lust. Week 2, we work on our discipline and our inner strength, so it should be discipline and strength and not anger and bullyishness. And the same is for each of the 7 weeks. We transform one of those 7 emotions, so by the time we come through the whole counting of the Omer, not only our godly self, but our animal self is now the better for it. By the time we come to Shavuos, we are ready to receive the Torah. We in plural. We receive the Torah with both our divine and animal souls involved in the process. Hence the menu. On Passover, when only our divine soul is able to relate to what's happening, it's only unleavened. It's matzah. There's no room for ego. There's no room for a sense of self. There's no room for my own ambition. My own animal sort of needs to be smothered. I got to say, just say no. Or in the positive way, the way Nike puts it, just do it. Just do it. Why? When? Do you enjoy it? I don't. I don't want to do it. I'm in a whole different place, but I just do it. There's no room for my own thinking even. There's no room for my own pleasure in Judaism. It's matzah-based. You ever taste matzah? Real matzah? It has no taste. It has no texture. It has no rising. There's no sense of self there. It's just the godly soul alone. And then for the 7 weeks of the Omer, it's symbolized through the Omer offering, which is barley, animal food, because the Omer is all about the inner animal, the untamed self, the ambitions, the pleasure principle, all of these things, but they're untamed, they're animalistic. And we work them through, albeit while we feed them barley onto the altar. Translation, we spend 7 weeks focusing on the real story, not our perfect inner Moses, our godly soul, but our inner animal soul with all of its demons. But we work them through a little bit, each to our own ability. And these 7 weeks are magical in empowering us to do so. And it's not too late. We still have another week to do so. So if you haven't done this inner homework that much, first of all, know that some of it is magically done for us. But we have another whole set of those 7 in the last week to do that homework. And by the time we come to Shavuos, ladies and gentlemen, we have now transformed our animal into a human. It's no longer an animal, and therefore there's no barley. It's human food that we bring to the temple, but not matzah. We bring chametz, leavened bread. We now take the ego, the ambition, the pleasure principle, everything about a human being, and we welcome it into the temple, because all of those things are useful if they're guided by the divine soul. Ambition, without ambition, we wouldn't do anything in this life. Without pleasure, how much could you enjoy a good Shabbat dinner if you don't enjoy pleasure? Without a sense of pleasure and delight, how much could you even enjoy a true moment of Torah study or prayer? It'll be dry. So the animal soul is a wonderful gift, so long as it's under our control and we, so to speak, humanize it. And that's what Shavuos is. So friends, in a nutshell, what I told you is, what I'm sharing with you, is that the journey between Passover of Shavuos to Shavuos is the journey of the godly soul getting on board with God, the animal soul slowly being transformed over the 7 weeks, and then on Shavuos, the animal soul embracing the message. Hence, unleavened bread, barley animal food, and then leavened bread. And now we have all of us intact for Shavuos. We're truly ready to connect to God, not just on a soul level, but even on a body level, not just our minds, but our hearts. Our entire person is in love with Hashem and Judaism. We're loving it. We're having Torah study, which Shavuos is all about Torah study. Ever studied Torah? It's delicious. And we're able to enjoy it because the animal soul has now been brought about into the process. Translate that for a moment into the corona situation now. It started a little before Pesach. For many of us, we survive it by having faith. And in the context of our discussion, I'm suggesting that over the 49 days, we're empowered to move from faith to trust. Because one of the ways of translating faith to trust is that faith is something that my soul has. My soul has faith. Trust is when even my animal soul, my mind and heart buy in and say, you know what? I can trust God. He has a plan. So that's perhaps something that we can try to internalize in real homework this year with Corona, to bring our animal soul along for the ride as well, and to realize God has a plan, and we're going to transform that faith to trust. And this transformation, this maturing of the emancipation of Passover into the full wholesomeness of the emancipation on Shavuos, when we bring over the animal soul, and this is a journey that each of us does every day, really. When we open our eyes in the morning, it's just faith. Modani. Who says that? Your godly soul. Your animal soul in the morning is worried, obsessed, bogged down by what we don't even know yet. But that's how it is. We wake up in the morning, we're grouchy. The godly soul's modani lefanecha. The godly soul knows that God is at your bedside. But the animal soul is worried and bogging us down. And it takes time to bring the animal soul along, which is why there's a morning prayer. And there's some Torah study, etc. So this journey really happens every single day. But it's spelled out in terms of the calendar from Pesach, the Omer, and Shavuos, as we said. This important central role of our inner journey, which we just described, is spelled out in two Talmudic statements. This statement is brought in the Talmud in two places. In one place it says, Ani nivreiti l'shamesh es koni. Translation, I was created to serve my maker. And the other place in the Talmud it says, or the other version, Ani lo nivreiti ela l'shamesh et koni. I was not created but to serve my maker. So, commentary, of course, has a good time with this. Why are the two versions? Why can't there be just one? Well, it's Judaism, it's the Talmud, no less. Of course, it's got to be complicated. And we have two versions of what the sages really said. I'm going to say this in a whisper. They probably said both. And if the oral Torah hands down to us both versions, there's a message in it. And the Hasidic commentaries, including and especially the Rebbe, say, don't you realize the Talmud is teaching us two levels of divine service? Level one is, I'm served to create my maker. I'm created to serve. I'm created to serve my maker. That's level one. And then ultimately an even higher level. I'm not created but to serve my maker. It's a much higher level of commitment. There's nothing but the service of my maker. Ani lo nivreti ela l'shamesh et koni, which can be translated to mean, let me shut this, that my entire being has no purpose and it doesn't even exist. All I am is an extension of my creator, denoting a much higher level of commitment, of subjugation, not just level one. I'm created to serve my maker, but I'm not created. There's nothing about me that really matters. I'm only just an extension of my maker. As some might say, it's a popular slang now, Ein Od Milvado. There's nothing but God. So that's the higher level. But dear friends, the Rebbe in one of his Hasidic discourses flips it on his head and he says, guess what? The higher one might be number one, the first version, and let me explain. The Rebbe says, of course, on the face of it, the normal approach is, yes, first I try to recognize I'm created to serve my maker, and then I come to a place where it's exclusionary. I'm nothing except but for my maker. But the Rebbe says there's also the reverse. And I'm explaining it exactly in the context of our discussion today. The first approach, when a Jew reaches a higher level of subjugation, where you recognize Eino Movado, there's nothing but God. I'm speaking to JLI students who know some of these terms. There's nothing but God. So a person says, Ani lo nivreti ela l'shamish et koni. I'm not created but for the service of my maker, which really means I'm not important. There's nothing about me that's important. I'm just an extension of the divine light, and therefore I shouldn't worry much about me and my abilities and my talents. They're all for naught. It's just about God. That's level 1, says the Rebbe. That's the level of Passover. When we put aside the ego, we almost try to ignore it, we smother it. It's only matzah, there's no room for leaven. I'm not created but for my maker. There's no room for sense of self and ego, because I'll run amok. I'll forget why I'm here. And then when we come to Shavuos, we translate, we graduate, so to speak, to the higher level. The Rebbe says in this beautiful discourse, and very much in line with the Rebbe's thinking, you're not to say I'm not created. I am created to serve my maker. Recognize your creativity, your talents, your ambitions. Don't ignore them. They were created for a reason. None of them are allowed to go to waste. You were created. Everything about you is on purpose, is needed for the mission of serving your maker. But it's important that this second step is the second step. I first need to have the recognition of Passover, of humility, of matzah, to recognize it's not all about me, because if it's all about me, I'm living a lie, and it's just stupidity. But once I realize it's not about me, it's about my godly soul, it's about God, and I experience the matzah, by the time I come to Shavuos, I'm able to look in the mirror and say, you see all the things that God gave you, all the qualities, all of your gifts, all of your opportunities, they're all divinely orchestrated. Don't say you weren't created but for your maker. You were created for your maker. You're absolutely created. You're a divine creation with no accidents. Every part of us, our gifts, our vices, our talents, our strengths, weaknesses, by nature or nurture, are all exactly perfectly orchestrated for the plan. Not just the parts of us that are perfect, but including the parts of us that are very imperfect. The Yetzer Hara, the animal soul, the evil inclination, it's all part of it. Because now we have learned how to bring that part of us into the mission, how to use our ambitions and our sense of self, our sense of self-awareness for the purpose and for the divine purpose. And dear friends, I'm going to conclude by saying that this is why the Torah was given in singular form. Next Friday morning, which is the anniversary of the giving of the Torah, some of us might be lucky enough to go to a minyan where it's safe. Some of us may do it at home. Most of us probably at home. But that's when we commemorate the reading of the Ten Commandments, and we once again close our eyes and internalize we're standing at the foot of the mountain, because it's happening again. How many people were at that mountain? 600,000 adult males from 20 to 60. So do the math, it's probably 3.5 billion people, maybe more. And yet, in that huge crowd, everyone felt that God is speaking to them singularly. Each person said, to quote the Medrash, Imi hadibur medaber. Wow, why is he speaking to me? It's the opposite of what most people think when they hear a speech in a lecture. They think, oh, he's talking to others. I love to tell the story of the rabbi who gave a particularly fiery speech rebuking the congregation about something that he felt was really important, and he really let them have it. And he gave it to them, how important it is for them to fix their ways in that particular area. And at the end of the speech, the people lined up to congratulate the rabbi. Rabbi, well said. And everyone said the same thing. Rabbi, you really gave it to them. You really told it to them. You really let them have it. And the rabbi finally had enough. And he banged up the bibah and he said, friends, I wasn't talking to them, I was talking to you. That's human nature when there's a speech, when we're hearing a message to everyone. We all think it's for someone else because me, I'm perfect. At Sinai, it was the opposite. God is talking to 3 million people. And every person said, why is he looking at me? Because everyone felt it was personal. That's why the 10 Commandments are written in singular. Everyone felt that it's personal, which denotes the fact that God cares about each individual and needs each individual. It's not just about the collective. It's not just about the Jewish people. It's about the Jew. Think about it. If a political leader gives a statement, it's about the masses. If a parent speaks to their children, it's about the benefit of each individual. And therefore, each one felt it's personal. If you're home today this year alone on Shavuos, don't feel bad. It's just like the first Shavuos where everyone felt it's just them. I'm going to say Shavuos this year is an opportunity for each of us to realize that we are empowered and called upon by God to accept his gift of the Torah. Not we collective. That's cheap. Not, yeah, there's so many Jews. Of course we accept. No. Do I accept? Most of us will likely be home. Do I stand there and say yes when God offers to renew the vows? There's no one else except me. Or one other person or a few other people in the home. And I get to close my eyes just like at that first Sinai revelation when everyone disappeared. You know, a good photographer takes a picture, there's hundreds of people, but you just see one, everyone else is blurred out. That's what we felt like at Sinai. This is a good year to test this. Even if you do get out to catch a kosher corona opportunity to hear the 10 Commandments, if you're younger than a certain age and it's kosher and legal, still don't lose this message that most of Shavuos you're going to be home and alone, and you're not at shul with a big kiddush with omelets and with blintzes and with cheesecakes, and everybody else is just you and maybe a few others, or maybe you're alone. It's an opportunity to personalize the message. In the context of our discussion today, God speaks to each of us, not just our godly soul, but each of us as we know ourselves, our humanity, our human animal, with our flaws and our strengths, everything about us, the whole you that stares back at you in the mirror. And God says, yeah, I want you. You think you're flawed, you think you're this, you think you're not so good, you think whatever. That's exactly how I made you. And that's the one I want. If I wanted just your godly soul, I could have kept you in heaven. If I wanted just your godly soul, I didn't need Shavuos. I could have stopped at Pesach. Shavuos, I want the leaven. I want the leavened bread. Chametz te'afena, make it leaven. Give me your whole person with its challenges. But that tamed, refined ego, that tamed, refined sense of personal ambition, because it's focused. I want you, as Uncle Sam says, to accept my Torah. Have a good Shabbos. Have a happy Shavuos. And may each of us receive the Torah, as the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe would say, to wish each other Kabbalah Satayda B'simcha B'pnimius, to receive, to accept the Torah with joy and inwardness. And let it be health for everybody. And ultimately, very soon, the revelation, which will be the next great revelation like Sinai, the coming of Mashiach, speedily in our time, even before Shavuos. Shabbat Shalom and an early Chag Sameach.